Good afternoon. The Secretary General is back in Baku at COP29. Today, he spoke to your colleagues who are covering the climate conference and said that the COP29 is now down to the wire. He underscored that what we need is clear agreement on an ambitious new climate finance goal in Baku in the context of a balanced set of decisions. The Secretary General appealed directly to ministers and to negotiators to soften their hard lines and navigate through their differences, and he asked them to keep their eye on the bigger picture. The Secretary General also underscored that finance is not a handout, it's an investment. It's an investment against the devastation that unchecked climate chaos will inflict on all of us. It's also a down payment on a safer, on a more prosperous future for every nation on earth. Today, he also met with various parties to discuss how a deal can be struck in Baku. Just keeping on travel, our Undersecretary General for Political and Peacebuilding Affairs, Rosemary DiCarlo, is in Colombia today. She will take part later today in the commemoration of the 8th anniversary of the peace agreement between the government of Colombia and the former FARC-EP guerrilla movement. The signing of the peace agreement ended one of the oldest armed conflicts in the world. Ms. DiCarlo will underscore that Colombia's peace process is a source of inspiration globally. Rarely in recent years has a long-standing armed conflict been resolved through negotiations. She will also reiterate the UN's support to Colombia, including through our verification mission and the implementation of the agreement and the pursuit of expanded peace. Ms. DiCarlo will also meet with Colombian officials and political leaders, as well as various signatories to the peace agreement and representatives of civil society, including of women's groups. Turning to the situation in Gaza, the humanitarian coordinator for the occupied Palestinian territory, Mohanad Hadi, warned today that insecurity could bring the humanitarian operations in Gaza to a standstill. In a statement issued a short time ago, Ms. Hadi said the delivery of critical aid across the Strip, including food, water, fuel, and medical supplies, is grinding to a halt. The survival of 2 million hangs in the balance, he said, and as we told you yesterday, bakeries in Gaza are closing one after the other for lack of flour or fuel to operate the power generators. Mr. Hadi said that for more than 6 weeks, Israeli authorities have banned commercial imports. At the same time, a surge in armed looting targeting humanitarian convoys and truck drivers, fueled by a breakdown in public order and safety, has further crippled our ability to collect supplies from border areas and deliver critical aid. He said that this year, UN trucks have been looted 75 times, including 15 attacks since November 4th. Meanwhile, armed people have broken into UN facilities on nearly 3 dozen occasions. Just last week, one convoy driver was shot in the head and hospitalized alongside one of his colleagues. Mr. Hadi stressed that humanitarian agencies in Gaza remain committed to staying and delivering, but our ability to do so is increasingly called into question. He appealed for the establishment of safe and unimpeded humanitarian access across Gaza through lawful means. Mr. Hadi underscored that our calls on behalf of civilians in Gaza can no longer be ignored. Turning now to the situation in the West Bank, our colleagues from the Office of the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs and our colleagues at UNRWA, in cooperation with the Palestinian Authority, as well as other humanitarian partners, are assessing the humanitarian needs of people affected by nearly 2-day operation conducted by Israeli forces in Jenin and Jenin refugee camp. OCHA stresses that children are bearing the brunt of the worsening situation in the West Bank. Our humanitarian colleagues report that since 7th of October of last year, 4 Palestinian children have been killed every week on average in the West Bank, marking a 3-fold increase compared to the first 9 months of 2023. Meanwhile, violence by settlers continues to displace Palestinian children in the West Bank. Of more than 1,700 children, Palestinian children displaced by settler violence, intimidation, harassment in Bedouin and herding communities, of more than 1,700 Palestinians displaced by settler violence, intimidation, harassment in Bedouin communities and herding communities, nearly half were children. Also, just turning to the humanitarian situation in Lebanon, the World Food Program and the Food and Agricultural Organization warned that the food security in Lebanon is expected to worsen. The ongoing hostilities are severely disrupting supply chains and deepening food insecurity, which has impacted more than 1.2 million people currently. With nearly a quarter of the Lebanese population already suffering from inadequate food consumption, the situation is set to deteriorate further as food prices remain high. WFP, through 12 convoys, has delivered food to more than 65,000 people, mostly in South and the Baalbek governorates. That's since September of this year. The Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs says that displacement continues amid renewed evacuation orders and airstrikes today. The International Organization for Migration reports that more than 880,000 people have been displaced within the countries, including more than 20,000 migrants who've been forced to flee both their homes and their workplaces. It's important to reiterate that civilians must be protected whether they choose to stay or whether they choose to leave. This morning, you heard from the Deputy Special Envoy for Syria, Najat Roshdi, who briefed council members by video on the situation in Syria. On the latest discussions that the Special Envoy, Geir Pedersen, has been having, Ms. Roshdi said he will have consultations with the Syrian governments in the coming days and with the opposition Syrian Negotiations Commission to move the political process forward. For her part, Edem Wosornu, the Director of Operations and Advocacy at OCHA, talked about the humanitarian situation. In total, she said, more than 500,000 people have now reportedly fled to Syria from Lebanon since late September. An estimated 2/3 are Syrians. This adds to needs in the region. Funding of the humanitarian response plan stands at only 28%, she said. And an update for you on our ongoing efforts in Sudan, and especially our efforts to reach people in hard-to-reach areas. Our colleagues at the World Food Program tell us that since the war began in Sudan 19 months ago, since the war began 19 months ago in Sudan, the first domestic UN flight traveled today from Port Sudan to Kassala, near the Sudanese border with Eritrea. WFP-managed flights will now offer regular flights to transport aid workers and light humanitarian cargo from Port Sudan to Kassala once a week. The new flight reduces the travel time for humanitarians, allowing them to go further into the country in only 1 hour compared to 2 days by road. This will enable humanitarian organizations to increase their presence and expand assistance in eastern Sudan, especially to response to the influx of newly displaced people fleeing violence in Gezira and Khartoum states into Kassala. And turning to Haiti, you saw that yesterday afternoon our colleagues Miroslav Yencha, the Assistant Secretary General for Political and Peacebuilding Affairs, spoke at the Council on Haiti. He said that Haiti is at a dire crossroads. The country is now in its 3rd year of political transition, and we're deeply concerned about the slow progress on Haiti's roadmap for restoring democratic institutions. He told council members, Haiti's crisis keeps intensifying, Mr. Yencha said, adding that we are deeply concerned about the safety and basic needs and human rights of people residing in gang-controlled areas, particularly of those that are women and children. The start of the deployment of the multinational security support mission on June 25th marked an important milestone, but Mr. Yencha said without substantial and sustained increase in voluntary contributions from member states, there is a real risk that the force will never be fully equipped, fully deployed, or able to offer sustained support for the Haitian National Police. A couple of updates to share with you. One, our peacekeeping colleagues have launched something called the Pilot Network for Uniformed Women Peacekeepers, and that was launched in 2 peacekeeping missions in Minurso in Western Sahara and in Abyei at UNISFA. The network connects women, military, police, justice, and correctional personnel. It's led by the Department of Peace Operations with funding from Germany, thank you, and seeks to boost peer support and ideas on how to better support uniformed women's participation in peacekeeping. Today's launch coincided with the 1-year anniversary of the network, which was first established in our South Sudan peacekeeping mission, UNMISS. To date, more than 400 women peacekeepers have signed up to this network, Women make up 10% of all uniformed peacekeeping personnel. Also today, I want to flag to you that about developments in another issue that we've spoken about quite a few times in this room over the years. Since 2000, and that's regarding paternity. Since 2006, over 700 paternity or child support claims have been reported to the United Nations implicating uniformed peacekeepers and UN staff members serving in peace operations, most of which relate to peacekeeping military personnel. That's about 85% of those claims. In our ongoing effort to increase transparency around this issue, we want to let you know that details of these claims are now available online on the Conduct in UN Field Missions website. While the UN and member states have made progress in the prevention and response to sexual exploitation and abuse, the majority of these claims remain unsolved, with fathers failing to meet their parenting responsibilities. In a video message published today on the issue, the Secretary General said these children deserve recognition, they deserve support and their dignity, and reiterated our commitment to making all of this a reality. He also said we count on member states to take action where their nationals are involved. A dedicated task force of the Secretariat is working to devise ways to facilitate the resolution of outstanding paternity claims in partnership with member states. And the Secretary General's video message is online, and our peacekeeping colleagues are launching a social media campaign to raise awareness, and they're happy to answer your questions if you have any. 2 international days today to celebrate. One for our viewers who are online. Today is World Television Day. TV continues to be the single largest source of video consumption. In addition to entertainment, we get news, like here, footage and stories from the big wide world out there. And at the UN, we provide a suite of multimedia products and services to reach audiences and support work that is in news media. The second international day, if I were to say to you, I brief, therefore I am, what day would today be? Exactly, Benno. Today is World Philosophy Day. On this day, UNESCO underlines the enduring value of philosophy for the development of human thought for each culture and for each individual. New payment today, 147th payment, this time from a country where one of its shores is the lowest land-based elevation on Earth. On Earth. Close, close. It is the Dead Sea, so if it's not Jordan, Israel. Israel paid its dues to date. Thank you very much. Edie, please.
Thank you, Steph. The International Criminal Court issued arrest warrants today for Israel's Prime Minister, former Defense Minister, and a senior Hamas official. Does the Secretary General have any comment?
I mean, obviously, we're aware of the issuance by the ICC of the warrants against 2 Israeli officials and a Hamas official. I would just tell you, as we've said before, the Secretary General respects the work and the independence of the International Criminal Court, and I will leave it at that for now.
And secondly, it was announced in Gaza today that the death toll has risen to 44,000, according to the Gaza Health Ministry. Does the Secretary General have any comment on that?
It's yet another grim and devastating milestone. I think we have continuously, and we will continue to condemn the loss of civilian lives that we've seen in Gaza, continue to call for the respect of international law, international humanitarian law, for the need of an immediate ceasefire and for the immediate and unconditional release of all hostages, and of course, as well for greater humanitarian access, as we've been talking about every day. Madame.
Given that there are now arrest warrants for these Israeli officials, would they be welcome to participate in the General Assembly here at the United Nations? The UN is sovereign territory with its own police force, would the UN be required, and would they arrest these officials if they came to the UN?
First of all, I don't want to get into hypotheticals, but let's make it clear, just on our colleagues here in security, they're here to keep us safe, to keep the building safe. They're not here to arrest people, right? So I mean, they don't. That's their function. So let's keep it at that. Obviously any travel by anyone who's indicted by the ICC would also involve the issue involve the state in which UN conference or UN headquarters are located. Margaret.
Continuing on ICC, now that the arrest warrants have been issued for Mr. Netanyahu and Mr. Gallant, and the third individual who's probably dead, in the past, the whole issue of the Secretary General or UN officials dealing with indicted or convicted individuals, how would these arrest warrants affect your ability for senior officials to speak with Netanyahu and Gallant?
The issue of our contact with persons subjected to an arrest warrant remains the same. It's outlined clearly in the public document that was issued by the then Secretary General in 2013, which is the rule is that there should not be any contacts between UN officials and individuals subject to arrest warrants, but the guidelines also clearly recognize that such contacts, especially by senior officials of the organization, may be required to address fundamental issues, operational issues, and our ability to carry out our mandates, including vital matters of security. So contacts can be had, they need to be limited, and there is also a procedure through which we advise in writing the international, the office of the ICC that these contacts are had.
And could I ask on Sudan? You mentioned about the flights. So just to be clear, these are UNHAS flights?
UNHAS flights,
that
yes.
resumed.
Yep.
And so there haven't been any at all for 19 months?
Yep.
And is that because of like fear of getting hit by a bullet?
Yeah, the
Okay.
security situation.
But the authorities in Port Sudan would have allowed it. It wasn't
Yes,
some
no,
sort of a objection by them. It was just a
I
security.
mean, I think there were a lot of factors involved in getting flight clearance in a country that's involved in a civil conflict.
So does that mean that DSS has decided that the situation is calm enough now for flights?
There's been clearance for these flights once a week.
And just could I have one more? On the paternity issue you mentioned, so you said most of these cases are unsolved or unresolved.
Yep.
Why is that? I mean, can't they just do a DNA test on the
Well, part of it
soldier?
is involves. It's not only obviously the recognition of paternity, but it's the payment of what's the word?
like child support?
Support. Thank you. The payment of child support. Obviously, we can't do any of this without the active cooperation of member states. Some member states are more cooperative than others. It involves also national judicial system. It's a very complicated and complex issue, but in a sense it shouldn't be, because it should just be about men recognizing their responsibilities. But we have to go through a lot of judicial hoops for that. I would encourage you to look at the website. I looked at it this morning. It's very in-depth and very telling.
But does that include, because we know from past situations that some of the cases are not consensual, that they're SEA related. So if it's a case of a potential rape or SEA, would the member state be allowed to object to their person being tested or DNA tested or something for paternity?
Let me put it this way. I mean, every case is different. Obviously, these men go home. They are under the responsibility of their, whether if they're still in the military or just under their national judicial system, and each one works separately. What we want is for people to own up to their responsibilities. Amélie, then Deji.
Thanks, Stéphane. About Ukraine, Vladimir Putin just confirmed that Russia hit Ukraine with a new kind of mid-range ballistic missile. He also said that Russia has the right to hit states whose weapons Ukraine uses to strike Russia. Any comment on this escalation?
Look, I think this is yet another concerning and worrying development. All of this going in the wrong direction. What we want to see is for all parties to take urgent steps to de-escalate the situation. Obviously, to ensure, as we've said many times, to protect civilians, not hit civilian targets or critical civilian infrastructure. And what we want to see is an end to this conflict in line with General Assembly resolutions, international law, and territorial integrity. Deji, then Serife, then Stefano.
Well, first, let me go back to ICC question. You just said a lot of the procedure, how the Secretary General and the high-ranking officials of the UN to meet with the people indicted by ICC. But let me put it simple. So, considering this, if Secretary General is not persona non grata, he wants to meet with Prime Minister Netanyahu, it could still happen, just like what happened in
Look,
Gaza.
I'm not. You're throwing a lot of hypotheticals
I know,
at the wall.
it's very,
what I'm
you know.
telling you is that the Secretary General or senior UN officials can meet with people indicted by the International Criminal Court if it is for operational reasons. It is for the fulfillment of the mandate. It is not something that is encouraged, but it is something that is clearly allowed. The Secretary General and his people have mandates to fulfill, mandates given to them by member states. They sometimes need to do certain things, and as long as it's in the fulfillment of their mandate, it is allowed. But the procedure is outlined in a very public document, which you're free to read.
All right. Emily actually just asked the first part of my question. The second question, my next part is, the ambassador of Ukraine to UK suggests that he believes, with the participation of the reported DPRK troops inside Russia, the World War III has already begun in 2024. What is the reaction from the UN?
I'm not here to provide color commentary on these sorts of hyperbole statements. Our focus remains on de-escalation and on seeing an end to this conflict. Madame, and then Senora.
Thank you. Stéphane, I want to know if the Secretary General has also an additional call to countries who are part of the ICC to implement this decision, this arrest warrant for Netanyahu and Gallant.
This is across the board. Member states have signed up to various treaties and organizations and charters, and if you sign up to them, it is important to fulfill the obligations, but this applies to everything.
I do have one additional question. You will recall that me and also many of my colleagues, initially when this whole thing started in Gaza, we were asking you whether you would call this a war crime with all the atrocities going on, and recently we've actually been asking you whether you would call it a genocide, and you've always said the same thing, that it's for the courts to decide. And now we see that the ICC seems to have made its decision with its arrest warrant. How will you define the events that are taking place in Gaza from now on?
I'm not a lawyer, but an indictment is an indictment. It's not a court ruling. So, I mean, our position, the language that we use, I think has been very consistent, and I think has been very clear.
But the accusation is that they have committed crimes against humanity and war crimes.
Yeah, I'm well aware of them, and I think the various parts of the UN, including the Secretary General and including the High Commissioner for Human Rights, I think have been very clear in their concern about the violations and flagrant violations of international law that we've seen. Signor Vaccara.
Grazie mille. Yes, follow up on ICC. I understand what you said about Secretary General.
That's good.
Can meet eventually, if he's for his function, somebody indicted by the ICC, actually a warrant for arrest warrant already issued. But the question is, does the Secretary General think that in that way, or you already met, for example, President Putin a month ago, the ICC credibility will be basically annulled. It will be not
I'm
there
not sure.
anymore. The U.S. government is already saying, U.S. government, actually in this case, both from Biden administration and Trump administration, they're accusing the ICC to be political and to be anti-Semitism.
What is the question?
So the
Stefano?
question is, if, because you basically say Guterres respect the ICC, but eventually he will have to meet, if he needs to meet the Prime Minister Netanyahu, my question is, in this case, he will undermine or not the credibility of
You mean,
the ICC?
is your, if I may rephrase your question into a shorter one, do you feel that when a Secretary General meets someone who's been indicted by the ICC, it undermines the ICC? I think that's the way I understand your question, and my answer is no. The Secretary General respects the work of the ICC, he respects its independence. And as I've said, there are clear guidelines that have been agreed to between the International Criminal Court and the United Nations on ways for a Secretary General or senior officials to continue to do their work.
Just a very quick follow-up, that the fact that from the U.S. Political spectrum, there is the accusation the ICC has been political motivated. And even an advisor of Trump is calling it a form of anti-Semitism. Any reaction?
I will leave all those questions to all the wonderful analysts and people that can answer those questions. Dennis, and then we'll go to Mike, and then we'll go to Abdelhamid, and then we'll come back to the room.
Talking about the context, does Secretary General plan to contact Trump in the nearest future, or has he already sent a message?
I will tell you that there will be, if I have an update for you on the contacts between the incoming administration and the Secretary General, I will do that for you. Sorry.
But did he send a letter?
I will share. He usually does at inauguration. Yeah. Mr. Mike. Mike?
Steph, I feel you. Two questions. Number one, there are reports that Prime Minister Netanyahu and high-level officials are meeting about a new program to get humanitarian aid into Gaza using private companies.
Sorry, Mike, if I could ask you to shut off the video, if you could shut off your video, because I can hear every other word. Let's try again. All right, I'll come back. Mike, are you on? Can you hear me? I see him.
I got you. Can
Go
you
ahead.
hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Thought you just didn't want to see my face. No problem. I don't know how much you caught before. The Prime Minister, Netanyahu, has been meeting with high-level officials within his government to develop a plan, apparently, to increase humanitarian aid going into Gaza, utilize private delivery, logistical service, together with IDF protection. Is the UN, A, looped in on this, and B, does it take a position on this possibility?
No, I'm not aware that we've been briefed. I mean, I think we've all read the various press reports. We continue to feel that the best way to improve the humanitarian situation of Palestinians is to do it through the international community, the humanitarian operations as they are, including with increased safety and security for them, and as well as a big role for the private sector to get the economy going. Your second question, sir.
Would Well, a follow-up to that before I get to the second one. Would the UN cooperate with such
I'm not going to get
a
into.
program?
I'm not going to. I can't answer that question until we've seen something on paper officially.
Okay, clarification. I don't know if I heard you correct earlier. Did you say Israel had paid up its dues?
Yes, sir, I did.
Israel paid up its UN dues?
Yes, it did.
Was that through an automatic deposit, or did they actively hand over the money?
Mike, I always enjoy your humor, but I think
I'm serious about that.
No,
I'm serious.
So it's not. I tell you, if our friend the comptroller had automatic access to the bank accounts of 193 countries, I can tell you we would not be in the liquidity crisis that we are in. Each country.
It just seemed like an inopportune day to put
That's
down
every country pays its dues when it's able to, when it chooses to, and we are grateful for the 147 member states that have paid up so far. Thank you, Mike. Abdelhamid. Abdelhamid?
Thank you, Steph. Sorry. Yesterday, Israeli security forces invaded Jenin. They left 8 people killed, 19 wounded. They destroyed the electricity system, the water system, and left many homes destroyed. However, I have not heard anything about what happened yesterday in Jenin.
I did mention it in my opening remarks about that we were there in Jenin assessing the damage caused by the Israeli operations. I mentioned in my opening remarks.
Wouldn't that deserve at least a condemnation?
We have, I think, spoken out repeatedly about our concern about the use of, in different instances, of kind of warlike weapons in law enforcement operations. Your other question, sir?
My question is about, again, the story about carjacking 98 trucks. Where the information came from, and how can any human being believe this story?
Abdelhamid, I'm not sure this is. You're free to ask whatever question you want to ask. What I can tell you is that we report on the facts. The analysis of how this could have happened, who could have organized this, I will leave that to you. Our concern, our worry, our very deep worry is that all of this aid that was meant for Palestinian civilians is somehow being diverted by armed men for other uses, for selling or whatever, and stealing trucks. It is just a plain crime. Okay. Yes, ma'am.
I've been formulating a question the last 20 minutes. I'm still not sure if I have it. Okay. The Israeli ambassador has said that the ICC's decision is the pinnacle of diplomatic terrorism, and in a statement that he made earlier today, that we will never give up on our basic right to self-defense, and no institution or resolution of the UN will change this. In light of the news from the ICC, do you foresee this affecting, any discussions that the UN or its agencies are having with Israel when it comes to ceasefire resolution or towards any humanitarian efforts that are going on?
Well, we regardless whether it's this conflict or any other, if we want to see a ceasefire, if we want to see increased humanitarian assistance, we have to speak to the people involved in the conflict. So we will continue to do so. It doesn't mean that we don't call out violations of humanitarian law when they occur. We don't condemn the killings of civilians. We will continue to speak out. We will continue to do whatever we can to ensure that there will be a ceasefire, to ensure that there will be humanitarian aid, to ensure that the hostages will be released, to ensure that we can get the Israelis and the Palestinians, as difficult as it may seem to imagine now, on a track back to a two-state solution. Sorry, Dennis, and then Edie.
Recently, U.S. administration sanctioned supplies of anti-personnel mines to Ukraine. Does UNSG has any comment
I
on
think
that?
our stand against the use of mines anywhere in the world remains the same. Edie.
Steph, is there any update on the status of the 98 trucks and drivers?
No, not. I will try again, but I haven't received any new information. Okay, thank you all. Have a good day.
It's only Thursday.
Did you see that game?